this week is about lifted increases, and lifted increases are generally considered to be the most invisible because if you can see in this sample, I don't have any holes and the fabric looks pretty symmetrical and balanced, and this is a good choice of an increase to use. Now, lifted increases can be worked on the right side of a stitch or on the left side of a stitch, and when they're worked on the right, you use the leg of the stitch below, and that leg becomes elongated and it slants towards the right. On the left, I use the left leg of the stitch, and that stitch becomes elongated, that leg becomes elongated, and it slants towards the left. Now, one of the reasons that this is such a good increase is that it is very symmetrical. When I work lifted increases, I always work it so that I have at least 2 stitches before I make the increase, because this gives me, if I am going to have a finished edge, this gives me a selvage, hey George, and it gives me a nice line of an uninterrupted column of stitches, and I want it to look the same on the other side because that is symmetrical. Now, you can't really see from here, but when you stand a ways back from a lifted increase, you should be able to see the symmetry. I have these columns of stitches going up along the side, some slanting towards the right, these slanting towards the left, and my new stitches coming up from the middle. Now, another thing I want to point out is notice how on the left, this little stitch can kind of get big and noticeable. And when we get to the point where we're making lifted increases, I will point out how you can, a couple of things you can do to fix that. I have a helper today. Okay, so I've got 8 stitches on here and I don't want to have it any longer. It'll take forever. The ones on the right are very simple. I knit 2 stitches because I want 2 stitches before my increase. And what I want to use for my increase is this, the right leg of the stitch below. Okay, here's my stitch on my needle, here's the stitch below, there's my right leg. Okay, and I can either, this is how it's got its name, lift this stitch onto my needle and then knit it. But the problem with that is it kind of distorts the stitch. Or some instructions will say go into the purl bump of the stitch. Now what that means is if I were to flip this thing over, there's a purl bump on the wrong side right below the stitch on my needle, and if I go into that purl bump and knit my stitch, that's going to cause less stress. Now whenever you're doing any increase or decrease, always use just the tip of your needles because that way you're not going to stretch your stitches out. And there's my increase. You can see that that leg of the stitch, the right leg of the stitch, is elongated because I've got 2 stitches coming out of it. Now the ones on the left are much more tricky. And they're tricky because where do I want my increase? Where do I want that left leg elongated? I want it here. I want these 2 stitches and I want this leg. So in order to get to that thing, I have to knit the stitch off of my needle first. So this is the left leg of the stitch in the row below my current stitch. But what happens, and this is what confuses people, is in order to get to that leg, I need to knit it. So now it's actually down here. It's not this one. If you were to try and lift this stitch and knit it, it would just dissolve, you know, just undo the stitch. So what I need to do is to get this stitch. Now I can go here and I can lift that onto my needle, or I can just insert my needle under that leg and put it on there. But whichever way I use, I've got a problem. If I were to knit this stitch through the front like I normally do, that is going to twist that leg. And so I'm not going to get that nice little elongated leg. I need to knit this through the back. And there it is. Now, if I look at that, I can see that I've got this nice elongated stitch there. I've got a nice elongated stitch on that side. Everything's great. The one thing that always bothers me is this little guy here. And let's look at what that thing is by backtracking and see how we can fix that. I'm not going to take time. I'm going to backtrack rather than knit some more because it's boring watching me knit. Okay, what is that? Well, let's get rid of that. That is the stitch that I knit. And for some reason, it is very difficult, and it depends on the yarn, not to get that thing kind of poofy and slanting in that way. It's just kind of a little lump. Now, what I've learned to do is when I've got a big stitch that I don't like is to follow the path of the yarn and to try and make it smaller. And where the path of that yarn is it's this guy right here. It's the space, it's the horizontal bar between those stitches. And what I can do while I'm knitting it is I can just give it a little tug to reduce the size of that before making my increase. And that will help somewhat. Okay? And then I can knit it. And that has made it, well, somewhat smaller. We'd have to get another stitch, another row here to see it, and I'll go ahead and do another row. And see if we can get that thing smaller. Now, if worse comes to worse, and I have been known to do this before, is when the whole thing is finished, if I've still got that poofy little stitch, I can go in and pull some of that excess yarn out with the tapestry needle or my knitting needle to make that stitch smaller if it's still bothering me. And now we got another row here. Let's see how that looks. Yeah, you can see that that is smaller. Now, if it's still a little large and I don't like it, I can just do this and make it nice and neat so that it matches. Now, would I do that for everything that I knit? No. The inside of a sleeve, not taking the time or trouble to do it. For the swatches in the master's program, yeah, I might take time to do it for that. And you can see that you have those nice stitches. And notice that these two are smaller. That's the one where it's kind of poofy. So if I wanted to fix it, I could go in and just kind of manipulate, just get a little bit of that excess yarn out and make it look neater. Okay, that's the tip for this week.